How do I get files from an old hard drive? Hi everyone, Leo Notenboom here for askleo.com. Hey, if you're not subscribed to my weekly email newsletter, Confident Computing, go visit askleo.com/newsletter and sign up today. Each week I share more tips, tricks, solutions, and information to help you use your technology more confidently. So you've got an old hard drive, or you've got a machine that won't boot from its hard drive, but you've got data on that hard drive that you want to recover, to get off of that hard drive. What do? Well, there are several approaches depending on your exact situation. I'm going to go through them in the order that, honestly, I prefer, the approaches that I prefer to taking the data off of an old hard drive. Solution number one is to actually make it an external hard drive. Now, this requires that you understand what kind of a hard drive you have, how big it is, 3.5 inch, 2.5 inch. What kind of an interface is probably not as big of a deal anymore. Most of them are SATA. If you're looking at an SSD, M.2 is a completely different interface. You can still do this with that, but it's not as common yet, simply because it's a newer technology. SATA is everywhere. So get an external enclosure that supports the type of drive you have. Put the drive in that external enclosure, and then all of a sudden you've got this nice external USB drive that you can connect up to any computer and presumably copy off the data and other things that you care about that were on that drive. Then, after you're done with it, you can reuse it, reformat it, use it for external storage, start putting backups on it, whatever. You've got yourself a nice external drive. Solution number two. There are such things as, I'll call it a USB enclosure without the enclosure. All it really boils down to is a cable that has the SATA connections at one end and a USB connection at the other. And you connect up the naked hard drive to this cable, and all of a sudden it appears as an external hard drive. If you've got an internal 3.5 inch drive, the bigger drives, you may also need to make sure that the cable comes with its own power supply to actually power the drive. The smaller drives that you might find in a laptop use significantly less power and can be driven off of the cable itself, but the larger drives need the extra power that an external power adapter will give you. This is something that I would use if the drives aren't something that I plan to keep using long term. It's a great temporary solution. In fact, one of these cables is just a neat tool to have in your toolbox, because when you run across a SATA drive that is coming from a machine you don't trust or a machine that's not working, you've got this thing that will allow you to pretty much immediately connect it up to any machine with a USB interface and start extracting the data, assuming the drive itself, of course, is working. It's also useful if you don't care what it looks like. I actually have, I think, 2 or 3 external drives permanently connected to cables like this down in my basement because I don't care. They're never going to travel anywhere. They are external storage, and I just leave them on a shelf with these kinds of cables attached. But they're not terribly expensive cables. Just make sure you're getting the right one for the kind of drive you're looking to use or to get the data off of. Solution number 3 is a little different. That involves leaving the drive in its original machine, but then booting from something else. Typically, that means booting from a USB version of a Linux live distribution. These are distributions that you can boot that don't actually try to install anything on your machine. They just boot from the USB stick you've provided and run Linux. Then, in Linux, you can then examine the contents of the hard drive on your machine, and you can copy files off to other USB devices, or you could do whatever other kinds of things you feel like you want to do to this. There are some Windows-based recovery disks or USB sticks as well, but the idea is the same. You're booting from something that is not going to try and install or actually even modify your hard disk in any way. It boots up into its own operating system, be it Linux or something else, and then allows you to examine the hard drive of the machine that it happened to be installed on, and then allows you to examine the hard drive of the machine you happen to be using it on. Now, I have to throw out a caveat, because these techniques, they're great when they work. But there are some things that are going to get in the way sometimes of having them work. For example, if the drive is encrypted, Well, encryption, on one hand, it's intended to prevent exactly this, right? It's intended to keep the data on that hard drive secure so that somebody can't just steal the hard drive and attach it to another machine. So you may not be able to access the hard drive's data regardless of what you do if the drive is encrypted. Depending on the encryption technology, if you're using BitLocker, you may be able to use a recovery key. If you're using VeraCrypt, you may be able to just use the password that you already know. But the bottom line is that it's not as simple as just plugging the drive into a machine and having it work. If the drive itself is damaged, if that's what's causing you problems in the first place, well, none of this is fixing the drive, right? All of this is giving you alternate ways of hopefully getting access to what's on the drive. But if the reason that the machine it came from isn't working is because the drive itself has failed, once again, you may not be able to get at the data. This may be one of those cases where either data recovery tools like Recover or a data recovery service might be something that you'd call into play if the data is worth enough, because the recovery services, of course, are going to cost you money. And finally, if the drive is part of a RAID array, then you're probably screwed. And I say that because for two reasons. One, depending on the configuration of the RAID array, the drive may only have part of the data, right? One of the things that RAID can do is distribute the data across multiple drives. It could be replicating data across multiple drives. It could be doing all sorts of interesting things in the name of resiliency and speed. However, even if you got lucky and the drive was, say, a drive used, I think, in RAID 0, where everything is just mirrored, then you're still out of luck because most RAID controllers use their own format, which means that Windows can't understand what's on that drive. The only way to get what's on that drive off of it is to use the exact same RAID controller and presumably the other disks that may have been installed at the same time. So those are the kinds of things that can get in your way. Now, this would not be askleo if I didn't say that you can completely prevent ever needing to do any of this by backing up. If you were simply backing up that machine on a regular basis, daily for example, then the hard drive could explode and you wouldn't care because you'd have a recent backup of what it is that was stored on that machine, and it wouldn't matter that you couldn't get at it later. So definitely do back things up. Make sure you're in a position where you never really need this for yourself. I totally understand that we are sometimes the tech support for our friends and our family, and they may not have gotten the backing up religion. So you may still end up finding yourself in this kind of a position trying to recover data from a disk that's having problems. Use this as an opportunity to spread the word. Have them start backing up and explain to them exactly how much they've risked by not backing up. Because, like I said, there are definitely scenarios where you may not be able to recover the information off of that hard disk. Hope that was helpful. For updates, for comments, for related links and more, visit askleo.com/139225. I'm Leo Notenboom, and this is askleo.com. Thanks for watching.